In this video, we'll be discussing the plurality method for determining the outcome of an election. This is the most simple method by far, and also the most commonly used method in the world for a lot of elections. Um, and as you can see from the slides, if we're using the plurality method, we're only going to count the first place votes in a sample election. Um, and so let's go ahead and I'm going to move to the um, lecture notes now. um, and actually start working on those, which I have somewhere around here. But now in section 1.2, focusing on the specific math, and this is typically what I do in class is all, work through the slides, give you my 2 cents, and then work on the packets, kind of doing some of the examples myself, and then letting you work on some of them yourself as well. And you can always work ahead if you want, or pause right now and try to fill them in and see if you can solve it yourself. But just a reminder with plurality, only first place votes count. So kind of what I'm imagining as I'm trying to think about the outcome of an election, because when there's a lot of data, it can be kind of hard to figure out who should win. But basically, we're only going to be looking at the first place votes as the way of determining the outcome. So basically, in this case, Art would win the election because he had first place votes. So Art would get first place, 14 total first place votes. Then if we wanted to do a complete ranking, we could say, well, who's going to be next up? Well, Kathy has 10 plus 1. Another thing that you want to make sure to do with plurality is add up all the votes. Like, don't just use the leading column because Kathy has 10 here, but she also has one more vote here. So it can be often easy to overlook, the smaller numbers, but obviously we add them all up to figure out how many total votes did Kathy get, and we don't want to leave any voters off, of course. So Kathy's going to get second, Art's going to get first. Third place we go to Debbie, and with 8 votes, and last place is going to go to Ben with 4 votes. And that would be a complete ranking of the candidate. And then what I would do after, discussing that is ask you guys as a class, do you see any issues with these results? And I would have you guys tell me your thoughts. And like I'll move back to the slides here again, because it brings up a good question. Why are we ignoring this data, and why are only first place votes mattering in this particular system? But if we're looking at the data here, notice that Art came out on top because he had 14 first place votes, and that's a lot of times the argument people will use uh, when they're trying to figure out who's going to win in this particular situation. But one reason maybe that this is not so good of a method is because if we look at the last place votes in that ballot, right, Art did have the most first place votes, but notice that every other voter had Art as last place, which this kind of indicates, okay, 14 people really love Art and have him highly, they want him to be their class president. But the rest of the people, 18, 22, 23, really do not like Art for whatever reason. So Art is a very polarizing character, and this is something that, can realistically happen with certain political figures, is some people love him, some people hate him, and there's not a whole lot in between. And obviously, does the hatred outweigh the love? In this case, yes. But with the plurality method, there's no black and white. There is an answer, and Art wins. And so a problem would be, well, we're ignoring how lowly ranked that person is, only considering the top votes. Also, we're ignoring a lot of other data too, right? We're not taking into account any of the preference schedule. And again, you might be wondering, why would we do this? Why would we only look at the first place votes? But really, what plurality is mimicking a single choice ballot. So if we were to give each of these voters only one choice at their top choice, what would obviously happen in general would be, well, who is their first place choice? They would vote for that person, right? So if these 14 people were given just one choice, well, they would have selected Art as their one vote. These 10 people would have selected Kathy, and so on. So when we're using the plurality method, we're really looking at a single choice ballot. Um, we're kind of converting all the data to a single choice ballot. And the reason why single choice ballots are not necessarily very good is we're ignoring a lot of data. Um, and and we'll kind of circle back to the fairness of these methods a little bit later as well. But a lot of times the data is not even collected, so it's not like you're just ignoring a bunch of data that you have. You're just kind of only giving people a single choice, and it's not really you're not actually looking into it um, as well. Um, and there are a lot of problems that arise from plurality method. And this is something that the U.S. is a problem that that plagues the U.S. to some degree, because when we're voting for president, each voter is only given one choice. They have to vote for one candidate. And also, just due to the historical nature of the Democratic and Republican Party being the winners always, there's another social perception that no other party can possibly win. So it really, even though there are technically more than two choices, there's not really two choices due to psychology. But really, some of the weaknesses of plurality method is it doesn't do a good job at distinguishing between candidates. Like going back to the example, imagine that Kathy also had 14 votes and Art had 14 votes, right? If we're using plurality, that would be a tie. They both have the same number of votes. End of discussion. Now we would try to do a tiebreaker, but there's typically there is no method of breaking a tie built into each of these systems. And how do we make a selection? Well, we don't have a way of distinguishing because usually we don't have the data. And now we could actually use the data using a plurality with elimination method, which we're going to get into tomorrow. But anyways, it can also be thrown off by insincere voters. And all what an insincere voter is just defined to be is a voter who's not really voting for their top choice. They're voting for someone based on alternative reasons. Like and you might wonder, why would anyone do this? Why wouldn't they just vote for who they want? Well, so a lot of times people vote, like this is something that happened in the 2016 presidential election. Some people voted for either Democrat or Republican because they really did not want the other candidate. So it was less about voting for who I want and more about voting for who I don't want against them, like voting for the party against who I really don't want. And that would be an insincere vote. And that can also misconstrue the data and not really help, because it's not really about who people want. It's about it's about a different issue. And sometimes an uneducated voter is also kind of the same in the same box. They don't really understand anything about the politics. They have like a single thing factor that makes their decision, and they're making their decisions without really knowing the full picture. And really, one thing about the United States, we don't really have very good of education on political systems. And obviously, a lot of times, if we were to learn about this in school, there's a lot of bias that can go into education, and a lot of times the bias will affect the answer. That it's not necessarily about the actuality of how this person will represent our country. It's more, there's a lot of other factors. Anyways, I'm getting a little bit off topic here. Sorry, I'm trying to not get too deeply into this, but there's a lot of reasons why people might vote insincerely as well. And often what will happen to countries that use a single choice plurality method is they won't really have much choice. It will restrict the choice down so much to where over time they'll be like in the United States, it results in an entrenched two-party system where you can't really get out of the Democrat or Republican. And just, to offer up an example, let's say for president of 2020, I was giving you the choice for, the next president of the United States. And after all the other stuff goes on, not even going to get into the preliminaries and whatever else, let's just say I give you these following two choices for president. So we got over here Voldemort and Darth Vader. Um, and here's your choice, right? And this is kind of one of the issues that we can be faced with. That we end up with these two people that we don't really want to be representing our country, but we are forced to choose between one of them. Um, and it's not necessarily all the fault of the voting method. There's a lot of things at play, but is this the best way of selecting someone? Not necessarily. And so in the next video, we'll talk about the Borda Count method, which is an alternative system.